Hi.
Jonathan, it's good to spend some time discussing your newest book, Beyond the Two-State Solution. What inspired you to write it?
Well, originally it started when I was talking with a Jewish American friend, and we were feeling that we need to go to think out of the box, that clearly there was a sense of paralysis. Things were not moving forward. It was very clear that the two-state solution was no longer viable, that there's not going to be a Palestinian state. The question is, what do we do then? How do
So,
we move beyond this impasse that we are in?
so why is it no longer viable?
Well, it was originally intended to be a compromise between these two forces, these two ideologies that were existentially totally contradictory to each other. And so it
Being
was being
Zionism,
Zionism, the idea that you want to create a Jewish state,
yep.
as Jewish as France is French, and Palestinian nationalism, which says Palestine Arabiya, Palestine is Arab. What is this? Who are all these people coming to take over and settler colonialism and all that stuff? These two movements, again, without pretending that there's any symmetry between them, and without laying blame or without evaluating the claims of each, clearly are at loggerheads and clearly cannot replace one another. So, what do? The idea of a grand historical compromise came around at the end of 1967. And I was one of those who were for it. It was a pragmatic compromise. It wasn't pretty, it wasn't totally fair, but it made sense. People can live with it.
So
And
what?
then
Sorry, go on.
the Zionist movement systematically undermined it,
How?
totally and completely.
How did they do that?
Well, through the settlement enterprise, by moving in about 7 or 800,000 Jews into the area, the 22% that was supposed to be a Palestinian state, but not only the numbers, the location, the infrastructure, the laws, the administration, the psychological framework, the integration of these Jewish settlers into Israeli life as permanent, complete lords and masters of the area, created a new dynamic where it was impossible anymore to think of a Palestinian state.
So
It
why is
also
the?
created
Go on. Sorry.
sorry, it also created the false impression that the only problem was with the 22% and not with all of Palestine, that we were struggling over control over the West Bank, which is not true, obviously,
So why is the US, EU, and other countries still wedded to the two-state solution?
because it's easy, it's comfortable. It talks about a solution that everybody knows it's not going to happen, but then they don't have to worry about the realities on the ground. They don't have to worry about the issue of racism, discrimination implicit in the whole Zionist enterprise. They don't have to worry about Palestinian rights or aspirations. Just wait. Eventually, when you get your state, that will solve your problems. When they know there's not going to be a state.
So wasn't the Trump plan an attempt to move beyond the two states?
Well, the Trump plan was really an implementation of the Zionist goal of trying to manage these pesky people by pretending to give them a state. They want a state? Here's a state. We'll call it a state. Doesn't have sovereignty, doesn't have authority, doesn't have contiguity, doesn't have borders, doesn't have control over its airspace or water resources or economy or anything. but we'll call it a state. If what you want is a state, here's a state. And this was basically the essence of my book. Why do we want a state? Why do Jewish people want a Jewish state? What is a Jewish state? So in a way, I was reverse engineering the whole process by asking Palestinians, why do you want a state? What is it that a state promises to give you? And by asking Zionists and Jewish Israelis, why do you want a state? What is a Jewish state? What does it promise to give you? And maybe I can give both groups everything that their ideologies promises them, except for exclusivity. You can have a Jewish state, but it's also going to be an Arab state. We can have an Arab state, but it's also a Jewish state. Somehow you have to incorporate and accept and maybe legitimize. You have to tweak your ideology in a way to take out the exclusivity out of it and to enable you to accept and understand the other side as well.
So what would a one state look like? Would you call it a one state?
I would call it a one state. It would look very much like a hybrid. It will look certainly better than most of the Arab states and better than the Jewish states. It will give you more, not less, of what your ideology promises you, because it will be a hybrid. It will not be exclusive. It will be a state that allows you as a group, as well as individuals, to really flourish without worrying about who's in the majority, who's got 51%, who is going to be dominant in this entity. You don't have to be dominant. You do have to flourish. You do have to have rights. You do have to have opportunities. But you can do that without actually denigrating anybody else.
Tell us what you think the roadblocks are, the impediments to achieving this, and then we'll look at the steps in order to...
Oh, there are many, many roadblocks. The first and most obvious one is the tremendous disparity of power between the two sides. If one side has all the power, then when you talk about equality, they feel that you're oppressing them. You're taking away their privilege. You're taking away their dominant position. So that's one obstacle. Another obstacle is the historical fears that the Jews have through anti-Semitism, through the Holocaust, to the point where they don't trust anybody and they don't feel secure. Even with all the power in the world, with the tremendous power they have over the Palestinians, they still feel afraid and they still feel insecure. So that's an obstacle. Another obstacle is because the world is too comfortable with the status quo. They are not willing to think in new terms, to think out of the box. International law, the United Nations system, the UN resolutions are all based on a very narrow nation state construct. What I'm proposing is that the state is not important. The ideology is not important. People are important. What is it that people want? People want freedom. They don't want a state. People want the freedom to move back and forth. They don't care whether they have a passport or an airport. If you give them a passport and an airport, but you don't allow them to move freely, then there's no use.
Sounds like the Israelis have got much more to give up to get to that point.
Well, in a sense, because they have everything, they have control over the entire area, they feel any removal of their privileged position is something they give up. But I would like to think that they also have a lot to gain, both in terms of legitimacy, both in terms of acceptance, but also in terms of rights. One of the things that I point out is that under my new system, they will have much more religious freedom than they have in Israel today. Israel today,
does things have to get worse before they get better?
maybe it does. My father, who was a minister, used to say, before you tell people the good news of the gospel, you have to tell them the bad news, that they are sinners and they're going to hell, and that God is a just God. You have to give them the bad news first before you give them the good news about salvation and the possibility of redemption. So that until people get the bad news that the two-state solution is not going to work, that it is impossible to achieve a Jewish state when half the people living under your control are not Jews, until you tell Palestinians that you cannot return back to 1948, that the Jewish Israelis are now a reality and they're living there and that this is their home. Until you give them that bad news, you can't give them the good news that you can, in fact, live together with others.
Well, are there minimum guarantees needed, minimum requirements to begin to move from where we are now to where you believe we can be?
Minimum requirements, yes. The guarantees are a little different. And the guarantees are to leverage all the people from the outside who support Jewish Israelis, who support Palestinian Arabs, to move them from being a part of the problem, feeding the fire, to becoming part of the solution, enabling this new hybrid entity to exist and to flourish. Those people can provide us with those guarantees. If Jews know that the entire world and the Arab world, and if Palestinians know that the Arab and the Muslim world is going to be supportive of their endeavor, I think that would provide a lot of guarantees. But you have to start with, what are the minimum requirements? What is it that Jews really want? Why is it that they wanted the Jewish states? What is it that Palestinians want? Why is it that they want a Palestinian state? And if you can list those things and see how they can be achieved within this hybrid one-state solution, then maybe you can generate a lot of enthusiasm for it.
Are there any precedents out there on which this vision can be modeled, or is it truly unique?
There are, but they don't have to be. I mean, you find in the United States, in Canada, and some Western countries, you find pluralistic societies where minorities are living together. It's not perfect, obviously, but even if there were no precedents, the Holy Land is unique. It is, in a sense, it belongs to all of humanity. Certainly, it belongs to the three monotheistic religions. I'm not too worried about there being a precedent or not being a precedent. Obviously, other examples have their problems, and this new state will have its problems. But it is possible to think in new creative terms and to have a vision that one can aspire to achieve.
Do you think you're going to see this one state in your lifetime?
It is possible. Depends on how long I live.
Jonathan, it's been stimulating to have this conversation with you. If folk listening to our conversation would like to know more about your book, Beyond the Two-State Solution, how do they access it?
Well, they can order it, obviously, or they can download a free electronic copy from nonviolenceinternational.net. They can download a copy in English, in Hebrew, or in Arabic. I intended for the book to be published in all three languages so that people will see I'm saying the same thing to Palestinians and to Israelis as I am to the outside world. It's nonviolenceinternational.net. And then you go to publications and you download it.
Jonathan, thank you very much indeed. We look forward to having another conversation in the near future. Thank you.
You're most welcome, Stephen.